The medical bay was a sterile white void, but the man on the table was a sun-going supernova. His skin radiated a heat that warped the air. As Kalia leaned in, her syringe inches from his neck, his eyes snapped open, not with awareness, but with the terrifying, glassy focus of a dying predator. His hand shot out, fingers like iron bands as they crushed her wrist, forcing the needle away from his pulsing vein. Have you ever seen someone fight so hard to stay alive that they actually become dangerous to the person trying to save them? Subscribe if you've ever had to trust your gut when the rules said otherwise. Let's look at how Kalia found herself in this position. 6 hours earlier, the station's secondary oxygen scrubber had hummed with its usual rhythmic, annoying rattle. It was a day of mundane maintenance and filing digital charts for minor radiation burns. Then the emergency klaxon tore through the silence of Outpost Zenith 4. A Solarian pilot had been brought in, his vitals flatlining, his skin turning a bruised metallic purple. The automated diagnostic droid had already flagged him for the incinerator, its logic circuits determining the synapse venom in his blood was 100% fatal. But Kalia saw a flicker. It wasn't on the monitors. It was the way his four-fingered hand remained pressed flat against his rapidly pounding chest, even in a state of clinical death. A human would have gone limp. This man was holding on to himself. Kalia overrode the droid's disposal protocol with a trembling command code. She dragged the heavy, overheating body into Trauma Bay 3, her own heart hammering against her ribs. The scans she initiated were nonsensical. His endocrine system wasn't failing. It was overclocking. Every gland in his body was dumping massive amounts of hormones into his bloodstream, driving his internal temperature to levels that should have cooked his organs. She realized then that the venom wasn't the only thing trying to kill him. His own biology was burning the house down to smoke out the intruder. He was a Solarian, a species the Union still barely understood. Their records were filled with gaps regarding their private biological imperatives. As his temperature climbed to a lethal 108 degrees, Kalia reached for a metabolic cooling agent. It was the only logical step. If she didn't bring his fever down, his brain would liquefy. The moment the needle's shadow fell across his throat, the dead man moved. His grip on her wrist was so tight she heard her own joints creak. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her, seeing some internal battlefield she couldn't imagine. He wasn't just resisting the medicine. He was terrified of it. If she injected him now, his survival response would drop. The fire would go out. And in the sudden cold, the venom would finish its work. Kalia looked at the readouts again, weaving the data through her mind. The spikes weren't random. They were rhythmic. It wasn't a seizure. It was a sequence. His body was waiting for a catalyst to finish the purge. The monitor's jagged spikes began to synchronize. They formed a pattern Kalia had only seen in ancient xenobiological texts, the double heart rhythm of a species that refuses to die. The Solarian's grip on her wrist didn't slacken. Instead, his other hand moved, joining the first to press flat against his chest. It was a desperate, grounding gesture. He was trying to keep his soul from boiling out of his skin. The venom, he rasped, his voice a dry scrape of metal on stone. Need the completion. Kalia froze. She knew the theory. Solarians possessed a primal reproductive imperative that, when triggered, overhauled their entire lymphatic system. It was a biological reset button. If his body could complete that cycle, the massive surge of clean, protective enzymes would wash the synapse venom from his receptors like a tidal wave. But he couldn't do it alone. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. To save him, she had to stop being a medic and start being a participant. The clinical protocols she had spent a decade mastering screamed against the idea. It was madness. It was a violation of every regulation in the Union handbook. And yet, if she did nothing, he would be a corpse before the next station rotation. Kalia moved with a sudden, frantic clarity. She locked the trauma bay doors, the hiss of the vacuum seal echoing her own sharp intake of breath. She shed the sterile layers of her uniform, her skin prickling in the oppressive artificial heat he was throwing off. When she finally made contact, the heat was nearly unbearable, a dry, electric burn that made her vision swim. The coupling was not a matter of romance. It was a desperate rhythmic combat against a ticking clock. Every touch sent a jolt of his overclocked nervous system through her own, a shared agony and ecstasy that blurred where her anatomy ended and his began. She could feel his heart, both of them thundering against her ribs, the four-fingered hand now gripping her shoulder so hard it would surely leave bruises. Slowly, the violent tremors in his muscles began to smooth out. The bruising purple tint of his skin receded, replaced by a healthy, glowing gold. If you've ever had to break the rules to do what's right, join us for more stories of the human spirit. Was the risk worth the reward? The return to reality was cold and quiet. Kalia stood by the primary monitor, her lab coat back on, watching the blue lines of his cardiac rhythm settle into a deep, stable trough. The fire had gone out, leaving only a gentle, lingering warmth in the room. The Solarian sat on the edge of the table, his strength returned with terrifying speed. He didn't thank her with words. Instead, he reached out, mirroring the gesture from the height of the crisis. He pressed his four-fingered hand flat against her chest, right over her heart. It wasn't a grab this time. It was a recognition. When the Apex wing arrived an hour later to extract him, the commander was baffled by the pilot's recovery. Kalia simply handed over a clean medical report, her face a mask of professional indifference. But as Dax Vance walked toward the docking umbilical, he pressed a small, jagged memory crystal into her palm, a silent promise. 3 months later, the doors to Trauma Bay 3 hissed open. Kalia didn't even look up from her tablet until she felt a familiar radiating heat. Dax stood there, a minor combat burn smoldering on his forearm, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked at the examination table.